Greetings. Let's talk a little bit about calcium and phosphorus and how they're regulated in the body. Um, their metabolism is very closely related to the parathyroid hormone and the calcitonin hormone. So again, this video it's very difficult to separate out these four pieces, calcium, phosphorus, parathyroid hormone, and calcitonin. So the goal is in this video, I'll give you how all of these things are connected to each other. So let's get started. The first thing we're going to look at is calcium. Okay, and so again, calcium, and again, I'm going to abbreviate it with calcium, and because it's a cation with two charges, right? So that's why it's calcium 2 plus. So again, is in different compartments. Most of it is in our bones. Um, Now, phosphorus, which I'm going to abbreviate as PHOS, uh, that is 85% of it is in the bone. So do you see a commonality between the two? Most of our calcium and phosphorus is in our bone because calcium plus phosphorus actually is one of the things that cause our bone to be very strong. So actually it's a big part of the bony matrix. So both calcium and phosphorus are in the huge amount in the bone. Okay. Now when we're talking about spaces, in the extracellular space, we have 1% of it approximately is the calcium. And the other good news is when you look at the extracellular space in human beings, 1% of it is phosphorus. So your phosphorus in the body, 1% is extracellular. So calcium and phosphorus pretty much are the same in the extracellular space. Okay. And so if you see, this is the level 2.5 to 4.5 milligrams per deciliter. And again, 85% of it is in the bones. So what's remaining? 14%, right? Okay, that's 14% of phosphorus. Now, again, you have 99% in the bone as far as calcium is concerned, and around 0.99% of it is in the extracellular space. So how much is remaining? 0.01%, right? Perfect. Again, the levels in the extracellular space. So remember the intravascular space and the interstitial spaces. So those two constitute extracellular space, and the concentration of calcium on both sides is the same. So when we draw blood and we measure calcium, we get the extracellular calcium because it's the same calcium in the interstitium as it is in the vascular space, right? And the level is 8.5 to 10.5. But this is where it becomes interesting. So the calcium that we measure is a sum total of all the calcium that's in the extracellular space. So how does calcium occur in the extracellular space? So there's two types of calcium that occur. There's calcium that's big. Why? Because it combines with albumin, which is a big protein. And it's so big it cannot go anywhere. Okay? And it's not metabolically active. The other calcium is either calcium that has combined with something small, like oxalate molecule, to give us calcium oxalate, and that's a salt. Okay. Now it's small enough to where it can diffuse. However, it's not metabolically active because what's metabolically active is ionized calcium or calcium with the charge on it. This is what's used for active cellular process. So again, when you look at extracellular calcium, when you measure, what you measure in the lab is a sum total of ionized calcium plus calcium salts like oxalate, okay, plus the non-diffusible calcium that has combined with albumin, okay? That's your total calcium concentration. Okay, perfect. Guys, got it? 99% of calcium in the bone. Phosphorus, 85% is in the bone. The big thing is bone has both a lot of calcium and a lot of phosphorus. Extracellular is 0.99%, okay? And it's got to do with ionized, diffusible non-ionized, and non-diffusible, which is connected to albumin. Extracellular phosphorus, okay, is 1%, okay? Now, what's remaining in the intracellular for the intracellular space for calcium? Well, remember, so 99% in the bone and 0.99% in the extracellular space. So 0.01% is what's in the cell. And so it's very, 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 very low. Calcium inside the cell is very, very, very low. Why is that? Because cell death, programmed cell death or apoptosis, one of the mechanisms of apoptosis is calcium entering the intracellular fluid or intracellular space. So cells use a lot of energy to keep this calcium out. Okay, guys, got it? And this is where a little differences is with the phosphorus because 85% was in the bones, 1% was in the extracellular space. You had 14% remaining, and that's in the intracellular space. So actually, you do have quite a bit of phosphorus in your intracellular space as compared to the extracellular space. And if you remember ATP, adenosine triphosphate, right? ATP, adenosine triphosphate. This is the energy currency. So again, phosphate and phosphorus plays an important role inside the cell. It plays a role in making DNA. So you do have quite a bit of phosphorus inside the cell, unlike calcium. Okay? So now you have a basic idea of calcium and phosphorus and how much they are in the body. So there's some commonalities. What are some commonalities? Bones. Well, both calcium and phosphorus are quite a bit in our bones. Extracellular space. Well, it's about 1%, and both are there in about 1%. We see the levels. This is calcium 8.5 to 10.5 in the extracellular space, and the phosphorus is 2.5 to 4.5 milligram per deciliter. So, and then with calcium, we talked about diffusible and not diffusible. And within diffusible, we talked about ionized and diffusible calcium, which is now a salt, which is connected to some kind of a chemical like oxalate, right? The big change was intracellular, where you don't have any calcium because any calcium inside any calcium inside would lead to apoptosis, but phosphorus is quite a bit in the intracellular space. Okay, so that's calcium and phosphorus and where they are in the body and how much. Okay, so next thing we'll talk about is correcting calcium. Okay, so remember just a second ago we talked about when we are measuring calcium in the laboratory, we measure the diffusible one, which includes the ionized calcium, the calcium salts, and also the non-diffusible, which is calcium, which is connected to albumin, right? Perfect. So between these three, what is really important to the body is ionized calcium, right? And so the goal of the body is whatever happens, I want my ionized calcium to be stable. Okay? I want my ionized calcium to be stable. And that's what our body is targeting. So let's sort of take a look at how this plays out. So here I've kind of drawn a little bit of a table. So this is a table which talks about three body states. Talks about a body with the normal albumin, and albumin is generally, I've shown it by a little thing like this, right? That's what I've used as a symbol. So here I have two albumins. That's normal, okay? I can have a patient with a higher albumin, right? So I show four albumins. Or I can have a patient that has got low albumin and I just I just have one albumin molecule here. Okay, great. Now I am also showing my ionized calcium with a triangle here. Okay, and any combination of this ionized calcium with albumin, I'm combining the triangle with the symbol for albumin. Okay, so this shows a complex which is the non-diffusible calcium, which is calcium that combines with albumin. Okay, so here it is. I have four ionized calciums, right? And two of them have combined with albumin. And so when I measure calcium in this patient, I'm going to get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6 calcium, right? Perfect. Here I have 4 ionized calcium, and I have 1 ionized calcium that's combined with albumin, which is 1 albumin. And so my total calcium measured here would be 4 plus 1, 5, right? Easy. Here in this case, where my albumin is very high, I have 4 ionized calciums, and I have 4 calciums that are combining with albumin. So the total calcium that I will measure is 8. Okay? So this table shows me something very interesting. What is that? In all three states, the ionized calcium, which is what my body is targeting, which is what matters to my body, that remains the same. But, but the calcium that I measure in all three is completely different. So in other words, I can get a lab value of calcium, but I can't just say whether this lab value is high or low and work off it. I have to correct it because I have to take into account how much albumin the patient has and then get that out and correct it so that I can try to get what the ionized calcium is. If the ionized calcium is low or high, then I actually have a true calcium abnormality. You guys see what I'm saying there? Yes? Because the calcium level that's measured is all the calcium in the body, in the extracellular space. However, the one that matters is only a specific component. Okay? What else does this show you? This shows you if a patient has high calcium, I gotta check and see if the patient has high albumin. And if they do, I gotta take a step back. Why? Because there's a possibility that I'm getting this high calcium because a lot of the albumin has combined with the calcium, and the ionized calcium actually there might be completely normal as it is here. Additionally, it also shows you if your calcium is low from the lab, and the next thing you got to do is take a look at the albumin. And if that's low, it might not be a low calcium issue. It might be the fact that the albumin is low, which is causing the overall number to become low. I see what I'm saying? Okay. So how do we do this? Before correcting anything, again, in real life and on tests, whenever you see a question related to calcium and whether it's too much or too little, patient safety before treating somebody with calcium or treating somebody to take calcium out of their body, we want to make sure that we are taking into account what their true state is or their true corrected calcium state is. And that's why we use this formula, which is calcium that's corrected equals calcium measured plus, and then I multiply 0.8 times, and then normal albumin minus patient albumin. Okay, so this is patient's measured albumin. This is what we measure in the lab. Okay, so here you go. You get a comprehensive metabolic panel, or you get a basic metabolic panel, and it gives you calcium. It also may give you albumin. So before you go chasing these levels down, right, correct these levels based on the value of the albumin that you have in that lab. And to correct it, this is how we do it. Now, normal albumin for a patient is considered 4 grams per deciliter. So the formula becomes correcting calcium is calcium that's measured plus 0.8 times 4 minus patient's albumin, and that's the measured albumin. Okay. Well, can you give me an example? Well, thanks for asking. Let's do it. Example 1. I measure calcium. That's 8 milligrams per deciliter. What's normal? 8.5 to 10.5 milligrams per deciliter. So apparently on the first look, it's on the lower side. Well, what's the next thing I do? Well, this is where you may see a next generation difficult question asking you, do you replace calcium? Do you assess for symptoms? Do you do DA? Or do you check patient's albumin? And suddenly, because now you know that I can't just depend on what's measured, I have to correct it by using patient's albumin, you know which answer you got to go for, right? Perfect. So now you look at patient's albumin and you see, it's 2 grams per deciliter. So I'm going to apply and I'm going to correct and see what I get. So here it is. I have measured calcium, which is right here, plus 0.8 times patient normal albumin, which we've approximated to 4, minus, this is patient's measured albumin, which is 2. What's 4 minus 2? 2. 2 times zero point 0.8 is, you can use the calculator, it's 1.6. Okay, so 8 plus 1.6 is 9.6. Is that normal? Absolutely. It's between 8.5 to 10.5. So in other words, you measured a low calcium, but when you corrected it, it was perfectly normal. So this is not a calcium issue. You do not correct calcium. This you're seeing because the albumin is low. Okay, this you're seeing because the albumin is low and you're not measuring the ionized calcium. You're measuring the total calcium. Question, hey, can we measure ionized calcium? Technically, yes, there might be a lab for it that's available. However, the lab is very, very expensive and is used only in very small condition in small number of conditions because it's way easier to correct this way. Okay, so in this case, in this example, do not correct the calcium or hypocalcemia. This is false hypocalcemia. Remember pseudo hyperkalemia? Remember, yes, you could have pseudo hyponatremia or false hyponatremia. Similarly, you can have false hypocalcemia. It appears low at the first glance, but when you correct it, it's completely normal. Good? Let's do the second example. Here, the calcium measured is 11.5. Uh-oh, 8.5 to 10.5. This is high. Now, patient's measured albumin is 6 grams per deciliter. So let's correct it. So that's patient's, how do we correct it? Calcium that's measured 11.5 plus, and then you have 0.8 multiplied by, remember, normal albumin is 4 minus 6. That's patient's measured albumin. So that's minus 2. What's minus 2 times 0.8? 1.6 minus 1.6, because remember this is minus 2. So 11.5 minus 1.6 is 9.9. Again it is between 8.5 to 10.5. Completely normal. So again, it is not an issue of increased calcium. So this would not be a candidate for management of hypercalcemia. You with me on this? Because it's an issue of albumin, which is high, which is causing the lab values to appear high to you. And that's how we measure calcium. It's the overall amount. So do not correct calcium in this case. This is false hypercalcemia or pseudo hypercalcemia. Okay? Guys got it? Easy, right? Excellent. Perfect. So we talked a little bit about phosphorus. So the next thing we're going to talk about is how we regulate calcium and phosphorus in our body. Okay? So we have a gland that is a parathyroid gland. So again, thyroid, it's in our neck. And on the thyroid, there's actually these four little glands, and they're called parathyroid glands. And how do we know they're on thyroid? Parathyroid glands, okay? Parathyroid glands. And their role is regulation of calcium and phosphorus. And they play a big role with this, especially calcium, okay? These glands secrete two hormones. The big one is parathyroid hormone. The little one is calcitonin. And so what happens? So if you have low calcium, that increases the production of parathyroid hormone. See the red arrow? Okay. So anytime your calcium runs low, parathyroid hormone is stimulated. If your calcium is high, the parathyroid hormone is suppressed. And do you see the feedback mechanism? High calcium, low parathyroid. Low calcium, high parathyroid. That's the normal order of business. Okay? So if your calcium is high and your parathyroid is high, that's a problem. If you have low calcium and low parathyroid, that's a problem. And the problem is actually problem of the parathyroids. Because what are you expecting? With low parathyroid hormone, with low calcium, you're expecting the parathyroid hormone to upregulate, to be produced more, to have a higher level, so that it can then bring it back to normal. And vice versa. If you have high calcium, you want the parathyroid hormone to be running low, right? Additionally, if your calcium runs high, it causes the parathyroid hormones to produce calcitonin. And the big thing calcitonin does is it decreases the activity of the osteoclasts in the bones to decrease calcium and phosphorus in the blood. That's all it does. Whenever osteoclasts, so you have osteoblasts and osteoclasts. Osteoclasts break bones, osteoblasts make bones. So when osteoclasts break bones, right? What do bones have most of? Calcium and phosphorus, remember? 99% of calcium and 85% of phosphorus. So they release what? They release lots of calcium and lots of phosphorus in the blood. So if you have high calcium, calcitonin kicks in and says, I don't want you to break down any bone because I got a lot of calcium. I don't need no calcium. So calcitonin, tone down the calcium. That's what it does. Okay. Okay, perfect. And that's the end of that. Calcitonin is not as big a player as parathyroid hormone is. So I just want to cover it, and I want to move on to what the meat of this is, which is the parathyroid hormone. So again, high calcium suppresses parathyroid hormone and low calcium increases the parathyroid hormone. So whenever you have high parathyroid hormone, what does that do? It does three things. Actually, technically, it does two things, but three things happen. First, parathyroid hormone talks to osteoclasts in the bones. And remember, osteoclasts do what in the bones? They break down the bones and gives you lots of calcium, lots of phosphorus. So what does the parathyroid hormone do to calcium and phosphorus levels in the blood? Increases both of them. Okay. Now, parathyroid hormone indirectly acts on the kidneys and through a mechanism produces active vitamin D, which regulates the gut and gut now absorbs more of calcium and phosphorus. So essentially, this pathway, parathyroid hormone, gives more vitamin D, gives higher level of calcium and higher level of phosphorus in the blood. Perfect. Now you have two mechanisms where increased parathyroid hormone gives lots of calcium and lots of phosphorus in the blood. Where does the blood go? To the kidneys. In the kidneys, this is the third mechanism. So remember, we had bones and we had the gut. Now, this is the third mechanism. And this is where a little change happens, but this change is really, really important to understand when we are thinking about calcium and phosphorus. Otherwise, it's always a mystery as to how this is regulated. In the kidneys, increased parathyroid hormone causes reabsorption of calcium from the urine into the blood. So it increases calcium level. However, increased parathyroid hormone causes increased excretion of the phosphorus in the blood. So it actually decreases the phosphorus in the blood. Okay, so again, if you see bones and GI, parathyroid hormone, lots of calcium, lots of phosphorus. However, since kidney has the last say in all of this, a good kidney with parathyroid hormone would hold on to calcium and get rid of phosphorus or decrease the phosphorus level. Okay, this is an extremely, extremely important concept. That's why I've asterisked this. If you have good kidneys, they're going to override bones and GI because everything is going into the kidneys. So in other words, if you have low calcium, your parathyroid hormone kicks in, and your parathyroid hormone is going to break bones and get more calcium and phosphorus from bones and absorb more phosphorus and calcium from GI, right? However, when it gets to the kidneys, it's going to get rid of the phosphorus and increase the levels of calcium. When it does, calcium is going to become high. It's going to suppress the parathyroid hormone. Yay, we're good. And of course, calcitonin kicks in. And so because the parathyroid hormone goes down, I'm not going to break bones. Calcitonin is going to further stop that activity. GI is not going to absorb the calcium and phosphorus, and life is good. Okay, you with me on this? So let's keep going. So again, bones and GI, all of them exit into kidney. So who has the final say? Kidney has the final say. Number one. Okay. What if kidneys are shot? What if they're not doing well? What happens? So kidneys, so you have increased parathyroid hormone, acts on kidneys, right? Right? What does it do? It increases phosphorus. Sorry, it increases, my bad, increases calcium, right? And decreases phosphorus by increasing its excretion. If the kidneys are not doing good, it's not able to reabsorb calcium, so the calcium goes down. And it's not able to excrete the phosphorus, means phosphorus goes up. Now, with kidney disease, what is seen, again, it goes through different stages. So early mild stages of kidney function, renal function that's going down, it is more focused on increased excretion of calcium. Later on, it not only excretes a lot of calcium, but it also, there's a big decrease in the phosphorus excretion. So early, you have low calcium, that's an issue. Later on, you have low calcium and high phosphorus, that's an issue. Okay, you with me on this? So remember this, when we talk about diseases, we're going to talk a little bit about how this comes to pass. Okay? All right, so let's do a quick recap and see if we understand what we covered in this lecture. Okay, let's make sure. Yep. So again, we talked about what? We talked about calcium and phosphorus. We talked about how both of them were a lot in our bones, about the same percentages in the extracellular space, and then you have calcium, which is ionized, diffusible but non-ionized, and non-diffusible, and how calcium, when we measure all three. And then with intracellular calcium, it's very, very low because that equals cell death when you have a lot of intracellular calcium. Intracellular phosphorus, you have quite a bit. Okay, and that's 14% of intracellular calcium. We talked about correcting calcium, and the big formula was calcium corrected equals calcium measured plus 0.8 times normal albumin minus patient's measured albumin, right? And we looked at two examples which showed us false or pseudo hyper and hypocalcemia. So whenever we are trying to chase down calcium, we've got to make sure we correct it to make sure we are chasing down the right person. Okay, excellent. Perfect. The next thing we talked about was how calcium and phosphorus is regulated. So we did a very brief talk about calcitonin with high calcium and how that suppresses bone breakdown with osteoclasts. That means it will not release a lot of calcium and phosphorus in the blood, which is what you want because you do have a lot of calcium already. But the big hormone is actually the parathyroid hormone. And if you have high calcium, it suppresses the production of parathyroid hormone that's produced by the parathyroid gland. And if you have low calcium, that causes high production of parathyroid hormone. What does parathyroid hormone do? Break down bone, gives you high calcium and phosphorus in the blood, and works through kidney to give you vitamin D, which absorbs calcium and phosphorus from the gut. So till now we were happy, but all of that ties into the kidney. All of that blood goes into the kidney. So when you have increased parathyroid hormone, kidney has the final say, and it increases calcium by reabsorbing the calcium from the urine that it's filtered, and it decreases the phosphorus by excreting more of it. And that's increased parathyroid hormone. That's what it does, is it increases the excretion of phosphorus. Okay. And that again, kidney has the final say on the calcium levels and the phosphorus levels. And that's good kidneys. So if the kidneys are shot, mild or early kidney disease is more related to decreased calcium level. Late is related to, again, very, very low calcium levels because it's excreting, it's not reabsorbing any of that calcium because it's shot. And with phosphorus, it's unable to excrete it, so it holds on to it. So later on, you have more issues with phosphorus.